She paid for it with her life. A necklace so impossibly expensive, it could have funded a war, a jewel so dripping with diamonds, it could blind a king. And yet, she never even wore it. She never even touched it. But her reputation for extravagance was so profound, so ingrained in the minds of her people, that the lie of the necklace became the truth, a truth that would fuel a revolution, topple a throne, and lead her, stripped of her finery, to the cold, hard judgment of the guillotine. This is a story about spending. Not the kind of spending you and I know, but a god-like, reality, bending, nation, breaking level of extravagance. We are about to rank the 5 most insanely lavish queens in history, women whose desires were so vast, they didn't just drain their treasuries, they altered the course of history itself. Their stories are filled with more than just silk and diamonds. They are filled with political intrigue, ruthless ambition, shocking cruelty, and a fundamental disconnect from the world the rest of us inhabit. So prepare yourself, because we are pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal the true cost of royal indulgence. And as you'll soon see, the price is often paid in blood. Our countdown begins not with a queen obsessed with jewels, but with one who found the very concept of a crown to be a gilded cage, a woman whose greatest extravagance was not what she bought, but what she threw away. At number 5 we have Christina, Queen of Sweden. Imagine a kingdom at the height of its power. A nation forged in the crucible of the 30 Years' War, feared and respected across Europe. At its head is a young queen, not yet a woman, but already a legend. Christina of Sweden ascended to the throne at the age of 6. She was raised not as a princess, but as a prince. Her father, the great King Gustavus Adolphus, had decreed it. She was to be the king his country needed. She studied 10 hours a day, mastering languages, philosophy, politics, and the art of war. She was brilliant, sharp-witted, and utterly uninterested in everything a queen was supposed to be. She hated the dresses, the courtly manners, the endless talk of marriage and heirs. She famously declared, "I would rather die than be a man's wife." And this is where her extravagance begins, not with gold, but with knowledge. While other monarchs built armies, Christina sought to build an Athens of the North. She began spending Sweden's considerable state funds with a fervor that alarmed her ministers. But she wasn't buying jewels or building frivolous palaces. She was buying books, thousands upon thousands of them, creating one of the finest libraries in the world. She sent her agents to scour Europe, acquiring priceless manuscripts and entire collections. Then, she started buying the authors themselves. She invited the greatest minds of the age to her cold northern court. Scholars, musicians, artists, and philosophers flocked to Stockholm, all funded by the Swedish state. Her greatest prize was the man considered the father of modern philosophy, Renbot Descartes. She sent a Swedish admiral and a warship to personally fetch him. She had him rise at 5 a.m. in the brutal Swedish winter to give her private lessons in philosophy. The cold, the early hours. It was all too much for the aging Frenchman. Descartes caught pneumonia and died within months. The court was aghast. The queen had, in her quest for knowledge, inadvertently killed the greatest philosopher in Europe. But Christina was undeterred. Her spending grew more and more lavish. She staged impossibly complex ballets and operas that lasted for days, with costumes and sets that cost a fortune. She commissioned portraits and sculptures from the finest artists. The Swedish treasury, once bulging with the spoils of war, began to hemorrhage money. Her council, led by the long-suffering Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, begged her to curb her spending to marry to secure the succession. She refused. She felt trapped. The Lutheran faith of her kingdom felt restrictive. The expectations of her court felt suffocating. So she made the most extravagant decision of all. In 1654, at the age of 27, at the peak of her kingdom's power, Queen Christina did the unthinkable. She abdicated. She gave it all away. The throne, the power, the kingdom her father had died for. She stood before her court, had the royal regalia removed from her body one piece at a time, and walked away a free woman. But her spending didn't stop. It evolved. After secretly converting to Catholicism, she made her way to Rome. Her entry into the city was a triumph of spectacle, designed by the master of Baroque, Bernini himself. She established a new court, a whirlwind of intellectual and artistic life. She became one of the most important patrons in Rome, protecting artists, funding scientific academies, and hosting salons where radical new ideas were debated. She lived as a queen without a kingdom, a monarch of the mind. She defied the Pope, dabbled in alchemy, and even plotted to become the Queen of Naples. In one particularly gruesome incident, she suspected her master of the horse, the Marchese Monaldeschi, of betraying her political secrets. So she had him tried and executed in cold blood inside a gallery of the Palace of Fontainebleau while she was a guest of the French king. She was a private citizen, yet she ordered an execution on foreign soil, claiming it was her sovereign right. This was Christina's ultimate extravagance. The belief that she was a law unto herself, a queen accountable to no one, not even when she no longer had a throne. She spent a nation's fortune on books and ideas, and when that wasn't enough, she spent the rest of her life living out the grandest, most expensive performance of all herself. Coming in at number 4 is a queen whose extravagance was forged not in pleasure, but in pure, unadulterated vengeance. We travel to medieval England, to a tale of betrayal so sharp. It reads like a horror story. Meet Isabella of France, a woman who would become known as the she-wolf. Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and the daughter of a powerful French king. She was married off at the age of 12 to the new King of England, Edward II. It was meant to be a powerful alliance. It became a living nightmare. Edward II was a weak king, but a devoted one, just not to his wife. His attention, his affection, and most importantly, the kingdom's wealth and power were all lavished upon his male favourites. First, it was Piers Gaveston. The king showered Gaveston with titles, lands, and jewels that should have belonged to the queen. Isabella was humiliated, sidelined, and ignored. The powerful English barons, disgusted by the king's favouritism and incompetence, rose up and had Gaveston executed. For a moment, it seemed Isabella might finally get the respect she deserved, but then came Hugh Despencer, and his father, also named Hugh Despencer. The Despensers were even more rapacious, more arrogant, and more controlling than Gaveston had been. They effectively seized control of the government, enriching themselves at the kingdom's expense and poisoning the king completely against his wife. They confiscated her lands, dismissed her loyal servants, and even took her children away from her. Isabella was a prisoner in her own court. The she-wolf was caged, and she was nursing a rage that would curdle into a magnificent, terrifying, and wildly expensive plan. Her chance came in 1325. A dispute over territory required a diplomat to be sent to her native France. Isabella, the French princess, volunteered. It was the perfect excuse. Once on French soil, free from the Despensers' control, she refused to return. She issued a public statement. She would not come back to England until the Despensers were removed from power. In Paris, she found a powerful ally, Roger Mortimer, an exiled English baron, who had his own reasons to despise the king and the Despensers. They became lovers, united by a shared thirst for revenge. And this is where the spending spree of a lifetime begins. Isabella, using her royal connections and her considerable charisma, began to raise an army. This wasn't a state-funded war. This was a personal vendetta, funded on credit and promises. She pawned her royal jewels. She secured massive loans from her brother, the King of France, and from merchants in the Low Countries. She promised land and titles to any lord who would join her cause. She was essentially taking out a mortgage on the Kingdom of England to fund an invasion against its own king. In September 1326, Isabella the she-wolf returned to England. She landed not as a supplicant queen, but as a conqueror, at the head of a mercenary army, with her lover Roger Mortimer by her side. The country, long sick of Edward and the Despensers, rose up to support her. The king's regime crumbled in weeks. The Despensers were captured. Their end was brutal. Hugh Despencer the Younger was publicly tried and sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, but not before they dressed him in a tunic emblazoned with his coat of arms reversed, a symbol of a traitor, and paraded him through the streets. Isabella had her revenge, and it was theatrical and bloody. But what of the king? Edward II was captured and forced to abdicate in favour of his and Isabella's young son. But a deposed king is always a threat. He was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. And here, the story descends into gruesome legend. The official story was that he died. But the rumours were horrific. To avoid marking the body of an anointed king, his captors, allegedly on the orders of Mortimer, and with Isabella's silent consent, executed him in a truly unspeakable manner. Legend says they pinned him down and inserted a red, hot poker into his bowels through a horn, burning him from the inside out. His screams were said to have been heard for miles around the castle, a death as unnatural and perverted as his killers believed his life had been. Isabella and Mortimer now ruled England as regents for the young king. They lavished themselves with the wealth and power they had seized. Mortimer became, in effect, the new king, more arrogant and greedy than the Despensers had ever been. Their extravagance was the extravagance of victors, dividing the spoils of a conquered nation. But the she-wolf's reign was short-lived. Her son, the young Edward III, grew tired of being a puppet. At the age of 17, he staged a coup, had Roger Mortimer arrested, tried, and hanged as a traitor. Isabella's great gamble, her fantastically expensive invasion, had brought her power, but it was fleeting. She was forced into a comfortable but powerless retirement, living out her days in lavish confinement. She spent a fortune not on palaces or parties, but on an army. Her greatest luxury was the destruction of her enemies. She bought herself a kingdom, and in the end, lost it all. Our third queen took extravagance to a level of such monumental folly that it became a symbol for the decay of an entire civilization. She didn't just spend money on a whim, she spent the budget for her nation's navy on a personal toy. We journey east to the forbidden city of 19th century China, to the court of the Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi was not born to rule. She entered the palace as a low-ranking concubine to the Xianfeng emperor, but through shrewd political maneuvering, and by giving birth to the emperor's only son, she rose to a position of immense power. When the emperor died, she became regent for her young son, and later for her nephew. For nearly 50 years, she was the de facto ruler of China, and she ruled with an iron fist clad in a silk glove, adorned with 3-inch long nail guards of jade and gold. Cixi presided over a China in turmoil. The old empire was being humiliated by the Western powers and a rising Japan. Reformers within the government argued for modernization. They knew China had to build a modern army and navy to survive. A massive program, the self-strengthening movement, was initiated. Funds were allocated, ships were ordered from Europe, and a new imperial navy was established. The future of China depended on its success. But Cixi had other priorities. While the reformers looked to the future, Cixi clung to the glories of the past. Her personal comfort and pleasure were paramount. Her daily expenses were staggering. A single meal could consist of over 100 different dishes, laid out on dozens of tables, which she would merely glance at before taking a few small bites. Her wardrobe contained thousands of silk gowns. She bathed in milk and was powdered with crushed pearls. Her true masterpiece of self-indulgence, however, was the renovation and expansion of the Summer Palace, an imperial garden retreat outside Beijing. This became her obsession. And it is here that we find the most infamous act of misappropriation in modern history. Cixi needed money for her palace. Lots of it, and she knew exactly where to find it. She systematically diverted funds that were explicitly earmarked for the Beiyang fleet, China's state-of-the-art navy. Millions of taels of silver that should have been buying battleships, shells and training for sailors were instead funneled into her pet project. Courtyards were paved, temples were gilded and vast man-made lakes were dug, and on the shore of Kunming Lake, Cixi ordered the construction of the ultimate symbol of her folly, the boat of purity and ease. It was a magnificent, two-story structure. It had intricate stonework, stained glass windows, and elegant verandas. But it was made almost entirely of marble and stone. It was a boat that could never sail, a permanent, immovable monument to decadence. While this marble boat sat gleaming on the lake, a testament to the Empress's whims, the real Chinese navy was literally rotting. Captains reported that they had no money for repairs. They went into battle with shells filled with sand or porcelain instead of gunpowder, because the funds for real ammunition had been embezzled. Their training was inadequate. Their morale was shattered. The inevitable reckoning came in 1894, with the First Sino-Japanese War. The newly modernized Japanese Navy, small but well-funded and well-trained, met the larger but neglected Chinese Beiyang fleet at the Battle of the Yali River. The result was a catastrophe. The Chinese ships were outmaneuvered and outgunned. Some captains discovered their main cannons were duds. Shells failed to explode. The fleet was annihilated. The defeat was a national humiliation from which the Qing dynasty would never recover. It laid China bare for further exploitation by foreign powers, and set the stage for the Boxer Rebellion, and the eventual collapse of the entire imperial system. And through it all, Cixi continued to live in her world of gilded fantasy. After the Boxer Rebellion, when foreign armies occupied Beijing and looted her precious palaces, she was forced to flee. But even in exile, her caravan was a mile long, laden with silks and treasures. She had built a marble boat, a pleasure craft that could go nowhere, while her enemies' steel warships sailed unopposed into her waters. Her extravagance wasn't just a personal failing. It was a strategic disaster, a betrayal of her people that cost thousands of lives and sank an empire. At number 2, we find a queen whose extravagance was so colossal, so all-encompassing, that it is difficult to even comprehend. Her spending was not a sign of weakness or delusion, it was a calculated projection of absolute power. We travel now to the glittering, frozen expanse of 18th century Russia and Bow before Catherine the Great. Catherine was not born Russian. She was a minor German princess named Sophie, brought to Russia to marry the heir, the pathetic and childish Peter III. Trapped in a loveless marriage, she used her intelligence and charm to win over the military and the court. 6 months after her husband became Tsar, she overthrew him in a coup and seized the throne for herself. He was conveniently assassinated shortly thereafter. Catherine, now Empress of all the Russias, knew that as a foreign usurper, her grip on power was tenuous. She needed to awe her subjects and intimidate her rivals, and her chosen method was an avalanche of opulence. She embarked on a building spree that would reshape St. Petersburg and Moscow. She expanded the Winter Palace, the official royal residence, into the Baroque masterpiece we see today, a sprawling confection of green and white with, according to legend, over 1,500 rooms, 1786 doors, and 1945 windows. Its interiors were a fantasy of gold leaf, malachite, and lapis lazuli. Then there was the Hermitage. It started as a small private gallery attached to the Winter Palace where she could retreat from court life. But Catherine was a voracious collector. She began buying up entire art collections from financially distressed aristocrats across Europe. In one go, she bought 225 paintings from a Berlin merchant. She acquired the collections of prime ministers and counts. Within years, her personal collection had swelled to nearly 4,000 paintings by masters like Rembrandt, Rubens, and Raphael, not to mention tens of thousands of drawings, engravings, and sculptures. She founded the Hermitage Museum, not for the public, but for her own private viewing. She once lamented, "Only the mice and I can admire all this." But palaces and art were just the beginning. Catherine's personal extravagance was legendary. She owned thousands of dresses, many of which she wore only once. For her coronation, her gown was so encrusted with silver embroidery that it was almost too heavy to wear. She had a passion for diamonds and precious stones, amassing a collection of jewels that was the envy of Europe. The state crown she commissioned contains nearly 5,000 diamonds and is topped by a massive flawless 398-carat ruby. Yet perhaps her most famous form of spending was on her lovers. Catherine had a succession of handsome young favorites, and she rewarded them with a generosity that bordered on the insane. She would shower them with titles, palaces, serfs by the thousand, and literal mountains of cash. Her most famous lover, Grigory Potemkin, was made a prince of the Holy Roman Empire and given so much wealth and power that he became a co-ruler in all but name. When she grew tired of a favorite, she would dismiss him with a parting gift that would make him rich for life, often hundreds of thousands of rubles and a vast estate. It was the world's most luxurious severance package. One famous story, though likely exaggerated, perfectly captures the spirit of her reign. When Catherine was planning a tour of the newly conquered territories in the Crimea, Potemkin, who was governor of the region, allegedly spent a fortune constructing mobile